And just in case you thought maybe I'm a little too negative here, maybe I haven't got the vibe of a brand new politics of the greatest government with the greatest budget of all time, like last night, maybe you thought, geez, Paul, surely you can find something positive to say about the greatest budget delivered by the greatest treasurer as part of the greatest government in the greatest political party of all time. Well, can I introduce you to a bloke writing in the Financial Review today who is an economist who works both here in Australia and in the United States. Chalmers delivers the weakest fiscal strategy of recent times. Let me read nice and clear here what Stephen Hamilton had to say. This is easily the weakest economic and fiscal strategy of any government since the Charter of Budget Honesty was established, and the exact opposite of the approach of a responsible economic manager. At the end of the day, everything in this budget is this government's responsibility. The ballooning spending, the never-ending deficits, the record levels of debt, the total lack of restraint across government, the massive unfunded tax cuts mostly for high-income earners, and the absence of any strategy or even objectives to deal with any of it. One thing is clear, it no longer has the benefit of the doubt. Honeymoon is over. The dragon needs to be slayed. It should be slayed sooner rather than later, but because of that media protection racket, and wait till I show you some examples of that over there at their ABC about how they took on the first budget of the Liberal Party's new government versus the Labor Party's new government. Of course, no bias here. We'll get to all of that in a second. But again, at the heart of this government being able to make it from opposition to government are lies. Provable, absolute lies. Because as you know, Chalmers, Albo, Bowen, particularly on things like power bills, their promise was the same over and over again. You see, they knew that Bill Shorten got it wrong. Now, despite the fact that they ended up with basically exactly the same green targets as Bill Shorten, it was all about how it was sold. You see, when Bill Shorten sold it this way in 2019...
So do you have a figure as to what it's going to cost businesses who will pass that cost on to consumers? Because there has to be a dollar figure.
There is no one mythical figure. The point about it is that we either tackle climate change or we don't. When you have a terrible climate event, that cost gets passed on.
So same target, or sorry, fact checkers, 45% versus 43%. This was a major change, of course. Exactly the same target, and even a bigger target because it was over a shorter period of time rather than 2019. We were talking about 2022. Well, what Albo did, despite the fact that the polling was absolutely the same, which is, should there be action on climate change? You betcha. Am I willing to pay for it? Hell no. They decided to repackage it, and people fell for the lie. The lie is that by making all of the changes that they planned to make, that exactly Bill Shorten planned to make 3 years earlier, hundreds of thousands of jobs would fall from the sky and power prices would fall.
Powering Australia will create 604,000 new jobs by 2030, 5 out of every 6 of them in regional Australia. Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
And of course, it worked. They ended the climate wars because they found a new way to wrap a dead fish, and people fell for it. Now, I get it. There was lots of reasons, and people were just sort of emotionally done with the last government. But we cannot pretend that I'm going to do something about cost of living and I'm going to do something about power prices wasn't what they actually promised. Think of it this way. If Tony Abbott had said, I'll stop the boats in 2015, what would the reaction have been? I'll cut the carbon tax probably by 2017. What would the reaction have been upon becoming the government in 2013? You know exactly what would have happened. But because largely the people who cover politics agree with the dead fish and admired the new wrapping on it, it's all hands off. But of course, they have made decisions that will push up your power prices. It ain't just all about Putin. Now, even if the price of gas and the price of coal is slightly higher, if not a whole lot higher than it was a couple of years ago, the cost of transition is hundreds of billions of dollars. As Andrew Bolt correctly pointed out, they're going to basically need to build 2 new power grids. As the CSIRO told us in 2018, again, who cares? because they're the diet people, right? It'll cost $1 trillion to do all of this. The reality is that we are now starting to see you will pay that money. You will pay that money this year, next year, and the year after. Your capacity to pay it will go backwards because you're not getting a pay rise despite their promise, unless, of course, you work in a unionised workforce. And therefore, of course, one business having a wage claim will result in an entire industry being able to have a strike. That's how they're going to get their pay rises in the next little while. But then once eventually there's 20% here and 40% there, like some of these union claims, guess what keeps happening? Inflation keeps going up. And as inflation goes up, the wage, it just becomes a horrible mess of their making and of their worsening. But we're in this scenario right now. And today, Jim Chalmers standing up there like the world champion and US champion that he thinks he is, Google it, WCW, well, he was taking questions today about that central promise which is now clearly evaporated. I keep telling you, find your last electricity bill before the last election, put it on your fridge, go back to it in 3 years later, measure the numbers and then decide your vote. Because this bloke lied. They lied to repackage the dead fish. People fell for it, the media cover up.